Hey folks, it's me, the OG, the original gangster, the OHNS, original hater of new Star Wars, back to tell you why Rogue One, a Star Wars movie, sucks. I'm going to give you 10 reasons why it sucks, and I thought I might give you those reasons in the cinematography style of the new Star Wars. Actually, I'm going to stop that because I think that might get pretty annoying. I'm going to do this video a little bit differently from how I do my normal content where I do a review and an analysis. If you'd like a more in-depth analysis, you can find one on my website at dvspress.com. For now, I'm going to do it a little bit more clickbaity, and I'm going to give you the top 10 reasons why Rogue One was pointless and bad. Number 10 is Michael Giacchino's bland, generic score of instantly forgettable themes and rolling dissonances. For me, this was a big low point of the movie. I thought the score did not match well with the movie at all. I thought the themes that Giacchino composed were incredibly forgettable and boring, and also didn't fit in with the familiar Star Wars themes that we're used to hearing. While I think Episode 7 was not John Williams' best work, even on a Star Wars movie, I still think it was much, much better than what we got out of Rogue One. Rogue One, rather than giving you big, stirring, emotional compositions during high points in the movie, what you get is just sort of like this rolling dissonance, this intense amount of chords and loud brass interchanging with strings doing tremolo and that sort of stuff that just sort of is there to provide extra tension to the movie when the movie's not really providing it itself. I felt a much less of an emotional connection to this score than I have in any Star Wars movie previous to this. So for me, that was a big low point, was Michael Giacchino's score. Other people like it, but I thought it was actually pretty bad. And it wasn't that it was bad. I've seen other movies of his that I liked better, but it didn't match the movie well. And maybe he was put in a position where he had to create an impossible task, which was do something new and still use John Williams' themes and that sort of stuff. Anyway, it doesn't really work. Number 9 is actually The Waste of Donnie Yen as a ripoff of Zatoichi, the blind samurai. And of course, he only has one Zatoichi fight scene. He plays a blind monk in this movie, and the blind monk also kicks ass with martial arts. And we only actually get to see that one time in the movie, so that's the end of the usefulness of that character after that happens. He spends the rest of the movie just chanting stuff about the Force, and then dying pointlessly in the final battle scene. It was a big waste of Donnie Yen, and I don't like to see good stuff get wasted. Number 8 is the Star Wars aesthetics checklist. And I'm expecting this to be a constant for all of the new Star Wars stuff, is that you have a list of aesthetic elements that compose Star Wars, and you just kind of go down the list and check them off. You go, okay, X-Wings, check. At-walkers, check. Okay, we need TIE fighters, check. Stormtroopers, check. And they're like, how about we do a variation? We'll do some black stormtroopers, check. We need Imperial officers, check. And the appearance of the scenes were all like the checklist. There's even a point where the characters are imprisoned, and the bars of the prison look like some of the bars from the Imperial prison stuff from the original movies. It's very, very close to the aesthetics there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just get the perception as you're watching the movie that they had to show every single aesthetic element from the original trilogy, and that's what had to be like a prime element of the movie. And in some cases, those aesthetics are placed in there almost obtusely in a way that kind of disrupts the flow of the stories, and I'll talk about that with number 1 a little bit more. Number 7 was this movie suffers from what I call incompetent villain syndrome, which is typical of a lot of Disney movies, actually. So incompetent villain syndrome is where you have a villain in the movie, and he's a villain because he does something that the audience hates him for. And so in this case, the villain is called Orson Krennic, and at the beginning of the movie, he does what we call a kick the dog moment. You have save the cat, which makes you instantly like someone. You have kick the dog, which makes you instantly hate someone. And what he does is he murders this guy's wife for basically no reason. And then later in the movie, he murders a bunch of the guy's friends, basically again for no reason, and actually would probably be working against the goals of the Empire by doing that. But it's just there to make you not sympathize with him. He performs nothing relevant in the plot whatsoever. All he does is sort of is sort of bumble around from set piece to set piece, getting yelled at by old characters from the original trilogy, including Grand Moff and Darth Vader. He does nothing. He could have been completely cut out of the movie, and it would have had no impact on the plot whatsoever, other than actually, it probably wouldn't have had any impact on the plot whatsoever if you just completely sliced him out of the entire thing. Number 6 is Rogue One has the worst exposition of any Star Wars movie I've ever seen, including Episode 1. It made absolutely no sense. I watched this movie with my wife, and about 40 minutes into it, she goes, I don't understand what's going on. What are all these scenes about? To her, the scenes were almost completely random because she didn't know the setup of the movie was about stealing the Death Star plans or about the Death Star being built. So, for me, as a person who knew that already, I just felt like all the scenes had no connection to one another. There was a bunch placed next to each other that were completely, seemingly out of chronological sense. Were there to provide the barest amount of characterization and then to move on to the next one. And it wasn't until basically 45 minutes into the movie that the plot actually does anything. Then you have a middle act, which is a series of things that are completely made moot. And then you have a third act that's basically ripped off from Return of the Jedi, where they take a stolen Imperial shuttle, get it to go through a shield, then create a diversion and have another crack team kind of infiltrate a base while there's a calamari warships waging a star battle up above the planet, including a Star Destroyer crashing into the thing they're trying to blow up. It's like they just took a bunch of points from Return of the Jedi and kind of threw them in there for that third scene. Number 5 is actually the reshoots. So number 5 reason is the reshoots. Supposedly up to 40% of this movie was actually reshot after the director turned it in, and it's actually pretty apparent that there's a lot of reshoots. There's a big tonal difference between various scenes, and there's a difference in the style of the cinematography. Whereas the ones, I think, from the original shoot were a lot of this, the reshoots were a lot more kind of stable. There was a lot closer framing on the reshoots, where like the face is kind of like up in the middle of the camera, and the original ones have a more somewhat documentary feel, closer to like the feel of the original Star Wars and even Episode 7, even J.J. Abrams' style. So the reshoots, I think, made the movie come out completely in having two different tones that didn't make sense with each other, and making each scene feel kind of incongruous with the one after it. There was no unified vision, and it's very, very apparent when that comes out. And the reshoots also added a bunch of things in which didn't add anything to the plot. We're basically there to satisfy fans, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Number 4 was the bland, boring, and underdeveloped characters whose pointless deaths have no emotional impact. This is actually a really, really big reason. It could be number 1. The big problem with Rogue One for most people is going to be trying to have any kind of connection with the characters. The characters aren't fleshed out. None of them have any kind of real personality. And as a result, when the characters are killed off one by one in the final act, they don't really have any kind of emotional impact. They also tend to die in rather pointless, unmeaningful ways, sort of with the exception of a droid. They have this Imperial droid who actually sacrifices himself in a meaningful way for him. He has a slight bit of character development in the movie, and he actually accomplishes something by sacrificing himself, whereas the other characters don't seem to do that so much. And part of the problem with that is that there's actually too many characters for what's in this movie. And if you think about, like the original Star Wars movie, you're introducing sort of one character at a time in a lot of senses. Like Han Solo doesn't join the caper until quite a ways into the movie, after you've had time to develop Luke and kind of see who Obi-Wan is and get a glimpse of Princess Leia. And Princess Leia's character development really comes in like the end of the second act, going into the third act. And then Han Solo actually has character development, and, all that sort of stuff from that original movie, which is actually replicated in even in Force Awakens. There's character development, and the characters have personality. In Rogue One, they're very, very lacking on personality. In some cases, you couldn't describe them other than to describe their physical appearance. And that includes Felicity Jones. as Jin Erso, and that includes the Cassian character. Both of those were very, very underdeveloped. Jin has almost no unique characteristics to herself. She has no personality. We don't really know her backstory other than like she escaped the Empire as a child, and then she's an adult and also like a criminal. But her personality doesn't reflect any kind of criminal history. Her personality doesn't reflect any kind of nobility really either. It's just kind of bland and in the middle and doesn't go anywhere throughout the movie. Cassian, they make one attempt at developing his character. They had a reshoot scene at the beginning where he kills a rebel because that rebel can't escape with him by climbing out of whatever area they're in. And that's there so that when we have another scene later on where he chooses not to assassinate Jin's father, even though that's like his mission, he's sort of making a step to say like, hey, the end doesn't justify the means. Of course, that is then rendered moot, which actually brings me to point number 3, which is every plot point is rendered moot by the things which surround that plot point. Everything that the movie does, it then like renders moot immediately afterwards and renders pointless. So the whole entire plot feels really, really pointless as you're going through it. And there's a million examples of this. So you have, you have Krennic trying to get Galen Erso at the beginning. Galen is supposedly in hiding because he doesn't want to work on this Death Star, and the Empire really, really wants him to work on the Death Star, and so he hides his family. The Empire kills his wife. His kid's able to get away, and then he agrees to help build the Death Star. Then he's like, oh, I made myself totally necessary to the project and built in the weakness to destroy the Death Star. And those two motivations kind of seem at odds, especially when it comes to like his wife dying. You would think that he would just flat out refuse to go because he knows that like people are going to get killed, hence why he's in hiding, why he's trying to actually avoid the Empire rather than go with them and help them build a weapon, which eventually destroys an entire planet. Those things seem incongruous. You have the first big plot point is, Jin, we need you to put the rebellion back together by finding Saw Gerrera. And they're like, we know that Saw Gerrera is like your friend and stuff, even though we don't ever explain how that worked. We just kind of leave empty that entire backstory. She goes to find Saw Gerrera, and then Saw Gerrera's necessity is rendered moot by him choosing to just die when he could escape an explosion. You have a Imperial pilot bringing something to Saw Gerrera, and then Saw Gerrera like has a mind alien torture him and make him go insane, and then like the next scene the guy is just okay. And then you have, of course, Jin see the data tape of her father explaining that they need to go to this other planet and get the Death Star plans, and they just sort of destroy that to make sure that they are able to have a second plot point before they get to the third act of going to get Jin's father and kill him for no reason. So then as you go into that second plot point, which is like, we're going to go and find Jin's father, we're going to find Galen Erso, you have Cassian decide not to kill him, only to have the rebels just bomb the hell out of the place and kill him anyway, which renders the entire setup of that second plot point completely pointless and moot, because if they could bomb the place and kill him, you'd think they would just do that. And if they needed a sniper to kill him, you'd think that they would do that, not do one and then halfway through that just do the other and blow stuff up. And really what you understand is that entire plot point exists just so that Galen can die in Jin's arms, and you can have an emotional moment with no setup and no real impact, because you don't really care about the characters yet at that point in the story. And it's another opportunity for the Krennic character to just kick the dog and kill all of Galen's other engineers for no reason, and actually probably hurt the Empire in the process. So each time they try to have some kind of like meaningful plot thing happen, they just kind of undermine it in whatever way they can. They have like the Rebel Alliance says, we're falling apart, there's no way we can have victory, we're not going to go get the plans. And then everybody, all of our little cast of characters that we've met so far, they're like, well, we'll go do it, we'll be Rogue One and we'll go do it. And they just go do it with no planning or anything, right? But then at the end of the movie, all the Calamari warships just like, all the Rebel warships just like, jump out of hyperspace above the planet and decide to have a space battle. They're like, I guess we're all in on this rebellion thing, even though just a few minutes ago we were all out. It's cool to change our mind because we need to have an epic space battle because this is, after all, a Star Wars movie. We can't have a Star Wars movie without an epic space battle at the end, right? Empire Strikes Back. You have this series of plot points that are rendered moot. You have a thing where, like, Cassian sacrifices himself only to come back at the end. You have Jyn Erso successfully sending off the Death Star plans into space. And then you have Krennic finally catch up with her and be like, I'm going to kill you. Instead of killing her after she's already, like, completed the plot goals, then Cassian returns from death to kill him. And then, of course, it's like, we don't have time to escape. We're going to blow up as the Death Star's, like, slowly blowing up parts of the planet. Like, it's just like the slowest explosion I've ever seen. Somehow they have time to get from the top of the tower down to the bottom and sit on the shore and wait for the explosion to envelop them and, like, hug each other. And you're like, well, couldn't they have just gotten on a ship and gotten out of there? But it seemed like every single time they tried to do something in the movie, they just, like, rendered it moot. It also, like, casts a lot of the lore into doubt. It makes kind of the beginning of the very first Star Wars movie not really make sense, because you end up having, like, Leia escape from the battle in a weird way that doesn't set up the dialogue for the original Star Wars movie very well. It's all pretty like self-contradictory in there. The number two reason is that the entire setup was bad, and the certainty of outcomes was total, making the movie have virtually no tension from the plot itself. The only tension we have is, like, are people going to survive? And it becomes pretty obvious at a certain point that, like, no one's going to survive. They're going to kill them all. But anyway, yeah, there's if the entire plot can be summed up by, like, one sentence in that, like, crawl at the beginning of A New Hope, and then you could get all the details you need to know about the really big plot goal, destroy the Death Star, just through the dialogue of the original movie, then you don't really need to make this movie. The entire movie was pointless. It adds nothing really substantial to the story of Star Wars. It doesn't, and then it detracts a little bit from the lore, as I mentioned. And the certainty of outcomes, that you know that they're going to get the Death Star plans, and you know that they're going to be able to beam them off. And by the way, there's a part where she's like, I beamed the plans to the entire galaxy. It's like, well, then how come only Leia had the data tapes? What? Right? So, like, they kind of, again, self-contradict a lot of the stuff in the lore. But the certainty of outcomes just means that as far as the plot goes, as far as the actual story goes, the sequence of events, we have complete and utter certainty of the outcomes at the end. There's no doubt in our minds about what's going to happen, and it pretty much happens the way that we already knew it was going to happen, because we had the original Star Wars movie, which let us know the outcomes of that. And I definitely found that, like, the movie lacked tension and was actually kind of boring. But the number one reason, the number one reason why Rogue One, in my opinion, fails as a movie is the fan service. There's a huge amount of fan service in this movie, and it's awful, and it happens at the expense of the story and the characters that are in this actual movie. And some of it is probably okay and doesn't really matter. There's a part where they just kind of are going through, and there's, like, C-3PO and R2-D2, and they say, like, C-3PO says, like, one thing to R2-D2, and that's the end of that. And that's probably fine. That's like having Stan Lee, like, sit in a bus in Doctor Strange or something like that, like, as a cameo. That's not a big deal. But what they have for other bits of, like, fan service, you know, they do have, like, the criminals from Tatooine kind of, like, walk by when they're on this other planet. They have this entire thing with Darth Vader being somehow involved in the movie. He has no impact on the plot whatsoever. He doesn't do anything other than, like, threaten the guy who's supposed to be the villain, Krennic, and look cool, right? And have a cool voice. And then at the end of the movie, you have this absolutely gratuitous scene that's pointless and stupid, and to me it was actually kind of cringy, but apparently a lot of people like it, of Darth Vader, like, going through this corridor, like, waving around his red lightsaber and killing all these rebel soldiers, like, in a pretty slow fashion, like, and they're like, we got to open the door and get out, and it's kind of like, I don't know, like a little bit of Alien in there, and that's just there to I think give the fans a taste of nostalgia to wash the bitter taste of the conclusion of the movie out of their mouths. But that's not really how Darth Vader kind of like breaks into the ship in the original movie. He has the regular stormtroopers coming in front of him. So why he felt like he needed to do that solo would be beyond me. But it's definitely there just for the fans. Now the worst fan service, which to me was just awful, was the CG Grand Moff. The CG Peter Cushing looked really weird. He did not look like Peter Cushing. And I know that they maybe are trying to show off tech. It's like, now we can just CG the actors. It's like, that's great, but it doesn't work. And so what they should have done is they should have looked at it and be like, it's not convincing. What should we do? It's like, well, the scene is pointless and contributes nothing to the story or to any of the characters in this movie. So maybe we ought to just not have a CG Grand Moff. It's like, but then the fans won't have something to ooh and ah about because we got to serve the fans. So we got to have a CG Grand Moff. And the CG Grand Moff just stands there. And there's like this, you see like the skin of Peter Cushing kind of sliding over things in like in kind of an inhuman way. Not that it's probably the best CG I've seen of like a human face, but it didn't look real. It looked really bad, especially when we compare the real Peter Cushing that we've seen in the original movies and all those amazing Hammer films from back in the day with Christopher Lee. So that looked really bad. The CG Leia was no better. It looked weird. It looked like some kind of melting wax statue when you look at these two actors sort of CG'd into a modern movie. I don't know why they did it, and like I said, it added nothing to the plot. And there's a bunch of other little pieces of fan service, including like the aesthetics checklist. And this is the big problem with Rogue One, is that they had to build everything around these, the final cut of the film was built around all of these pieces of fan service that were there to sort of titillate fans. Like seeing Darth Vader in his castle, in his like lava castle thing, whatever it was. None of that had anything to do with the story and the characters, and so what you lost was any opportunity to develop the characters and let you care about them in a really meaningful sense. You're missing all the scenes where they could have had more banter with each other, revealed their backstory, said something about their personality, had some big conflicts with one another over like the nature of like, does the end justify the means? Should I do this for money or not? Like, what's the nature of the Force? Like, they could have actually had a lot of different communications with each other. There were like 5 or 6 main characters, and in the end, none of them have any personality because any opportunity we had to develop that personality ends up just being sort of sacrificed at the altar of having to hit the aesthetics checklist and having to do a lot of fan service. So overall, I think those are the top 10 reasons why Rogue One, a Star Wars movie, was pointless and bad. Let me know your reasons down below if you didn't like it, or let me know why you liked it. You're allowed to not agree with me. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. The comparisons are inevitable. People are like, is it good? I'm like, compared to what? So someone asked me, a friend of mine asked me, since I know you didn't like Force Awakens, which one do you think was worse? And I will tell you that I found Rogue One to be less disappointing. But I found it to be less disappointing because my standards were much, much lower. But even though my standards were lower, they were way, way low, it still failed to meet my expectations and left me feeling disappointed. I didn't even feel any significant nostalgia. A lot of the aesthetics were weird. I mentioned this in my analysis. They did a lot of odd things with some of like the Rebel Soldier production. Anyway, I didn't even feel like any kind of nostalgia watching the movie. So it was a bigger disappointment. And when I look at all the technical things that Rogue One did versus what Force Awakens did, I actually think, and you guys are going to maybe hate me for saying this, I think Force Awakens is actually the better movie. I didn't like Force Awakens, but I think it's more effective as a movie. It looks better. The story goes through events better, even though I don't like the plot of Force Awakens really at all. The characters at least have personality, and we have at least a little bit of caring about them. Even if you don't like the characters, you care about their outcomes, at least a little bit. And we have older characters that we already care about acting within the movie, and we're able to have emotional connections with them as well. We have time to develop the new characters in Force Awakens that just doesn't happen in Rogue One. And the score of Force Awakens is like way better. The production in general of Force Awakens ends up being better. It ended up being a more exciting, intense film, even though I knew everything that was going to happen before it happened. Rogue One, I was even more certain of the outcomes with Rogue One, and so that made it just, I don't know, very not tense, kind of boring. So that's my unpopular opinion, probably pissing off my own subscribers by saying that Force Awakens was the better movie. But when I look at it more objectively and I look at the technical qualities of both films, I look at the effectiveness of both films, I think Force Awakens is a better movie than Rogue One, a Star Wars story. That's all I have to say about that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Last thing I will say as well, on Friday, my new fantasy novel shipped, Water of Awakening. You can get it on paperback or on ebook for 99 cents. Links are down below. And I'm going to be running a giveaway, and I'm going to link the giveaway down below in the description and probably in a comment as well. That giveaway will give you a chance to get the ebook for free and read this particular adventure fantasy novel for free. And I hope you will enjoy it if you do read it, and help out your fellow consumers by giving them a review. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys next time.